Hi guys, what up, Viper here, and if you guys want to get into Parallel, you're at the right spot, because I'm going to give you an overview of all of the basic Paragons and Parallels, which basically means all the decks in the current meta that people actually play. I'll give you an idea of the key cards and the key things to consider when playing the game so that you know what's going on and you can improve your gameplay. So, I assume that everybody is aware we have 5 different parallels, right? The 5 different colors in the game, and each of those colors has 3 different like hero cards, and outside of one of them they are all essentially playable cards, and you can play them whenever you have enough mana and decide to do so, and they all give you a passive, right? So most of the time there's one playable deck per one of those guys. Maybe there's like slight different variations of them, but usually it's one deck per guy at the moment, and not all of them are really meta relevant. So let's just start with this screen here, right? And we can look, for example, Augencore has Arak, Combat Overseer, Jan, Chief Engineer, and Juggernaut Workshop. Now Arak, very rarely you will see somebody playing Arak, and the passive is friendly upgrade. Non-token units have Aftermath, create a 1/1 nanobot. The 1/1 nanobot can activate and be an upgrade +1/+1 to another unit. So if you play versus this, your main goal is just like keeping them off the board and clearing out every unit that they play so that they cannot connect upgrades on units and start snowballing with summoning a bunch of these nanobots, etc, etc. Jan, pretty much nobody plays this, not even really worth talking about at the moment. Now, Juggernaut Workshop is probably very few times that you will see this, but every now and then somebody is gonna play this against you, and this is special in terms of this Paragon does not have an active. You cannot play him. It's entirely passive, and the passive is you start the game with 4 counters. At the end of every turn you remove 1 counter. After the last counter is removed, you create a Juggernaut and you add 3 counters back. The Juggernauts are basically these 3 here. The artillery one, a 2/5 that can deal a little bit of damage, a defender, and armed guy. Armed in this game means if you attack and you would deal enough damage to kill the other guy does no retaliation damage. Defender, well, if your opponent attacks and you have a defender, you can make them hit the defender, and this one just deals 2 damage, so it's a reactive thing. So it gives you a 0 mana big tempo swing at the end of your 4th turn, 7th turn, 10th turn, and so on. What is like cards to look out for in Augencore? Okay, so looking at the Augencore decks, you're not gonna fight many of them, but some of them are gonna be oriented around upgrades, and if they're oriented around upgrades, they're usually oriented around these salvage cards. Salvage means if the unit dies, they send the upgrade that was equipped to them and put it onto another unit. This is very scary, because usually they try to pull this combo off where they play Portable Energy Bay on a 1 cost, preferably unit of salvage, and if that unit dies, then it Aftermath is on death, right? It summons the energy drones and they can salvage onto the energy drones, so they just get more and more of these tokens, and then they can do a lot of crazy combo stuff with that. So versus the upgrade focused decks, you really just try to keep them off the board, try to eliminate every single unit that they play, and you keep value trading, and then their combo heavy deck built around getting these upgrades and salvaging them is gonna fall apart. There's usually this like Arak Jan kind of playstyle. Now versus Juggernaut Workshop, which likely you will face, the others maybe once in 100 games, I don't know. The main key to the entire early game, because the deck really doesn't have early game, is this card. And you can only play it if you have Juggernaut Workshop. Well, kind of works if you read the ability, because he says when you overclock, the unit may remove a counter from Juggernaut Workshop, and after Juggernaut is created, it gains +1/+1. So this costs 3, and overclock at least costs you 1 mana, so you can play it the earliest on turn 4 and use the ability, but there's also ways to cheat out 1 mana. So sometimes essentially this big tempo swing that is kind of the entire early game existence or mid game existence of this Juggernaut deck is that you play this and you cheat out the big guy a turn earlier. So either you play the big guy on turn 3, 6, 9 and forward, right? Or you play this on turn 4, and then the next tempo swing is gonna be on turn 6, right? So you just kind of try to be ready and try to have a strong turns into these, because this essentially means your opponent is paying 4 mana for this guy that doesn't interact with your board, and they can at most summon either a big defender or a guy that deals 2 damage. So if you have like a really valuable card with 3 HP, and if it survives, then it does something good, your opponent cannot play this and kill that 3 HP card, for example. Then other notable cards are Repeater Cannon, for example. The upgraded unit it can attack 2 times each turn, and it attacks with armed, right? Armed while attacking unit deals its damage first, unless the other unit also has armed. So they can clear out the boards, and if you cannot remove them with spells or something like that, you cannot really contest the board with more units. So you try to really keep them off the board and remove all of their stuff so that they cannot hit those upgrades and do a lot of problematic things. Then another notable card is Upcycle Technology. After it's attached, select a friendly banked Augencore card. After upgrading unit is destroyed, play the chosen card for 3. You usually try to play 8 mana cards with this for 5 mana because you equip it. You attack into something, it dies, you summon the 8 mana card. You either summon Sestmir, right? Really big win condition unit. Not very fast, doesn't close out the game very fast, but it's hard to deal with. Or, this is the last super notable card, destroy all non-upgraded units for 8 mana. So once your opponent has 8 mana, they can just wipe all of your boards, and if they have upgraded units, they will survive that. So keep that in mind when playing versus the Augencore decks. Now let's have a look at Earthen. Earthen has, for example, Kathari, Arbiter of Earth. Nobody plays this. Nehemiah, Defender of Earth, most played Earthen guy, girl in this case. The passive is after the first friendly unit with Defender is destroyed each turn, target friendly unit against Defender. So if a Defender dies, you give Defender to another guy. And Nehemiah herself is a 0/7 Defender, and friendly units with Defender deal damage equal to their current health instead of attack. This means it's a 7/7, and if you deal 3 damage to it, then it's a 4/4, and that same works for every Defender, right? Every Defender's attack equals their health. Even if, for example, it would be a 6/2 Defender, now it's a 2/2 Defender because Nehemiah is on the board. And then there's Shoshana, Rebuilder of Earth, and the active, you set your health to 30 if you play her, 9 mana, 12/10, very big, very expensive card. Passive though, maximum health and starting health of 40, which means you don't really have any support in the early game, but you can just let your opponent deal more damage to you without losing the game immediately. Now, the thing about Earthen in general is that Earthen decks try to play a lot of big units, and that's the goal. They play bigger units than the other people, and they just try to contest what the other person is doing with their units. Nehemiah, usually a more aggressive leaning version compared to Shoshana, because, well, we see Shoshana, you start with 40 life, and you can play your guy for 9 mana. And Nehemiah is a lot more aggressive, because if you have a defender that has a high health and low attack total, with Nehemiah, the card is already really threatening in attacking as well, not only in defending. Now, looking at the Earthen cards, so there's a lot of stuff that is just like big unit and play really strong units. What is the first super notable thing though? Steward of the Guard, at the start of your turn you gain 1 energy. You really have to remove this card very quickly, otherwise your opponent's gonna play those big units even earlier, and you're gonna have just a lot of trouble dealing with the game. Just mana cheat, right? Mana cheat, really powerful, you have to deal with it. Then we have, like, shortly talking about this really big unit, not because it's a 2/4, but because when the unit becomes dormant, it's a lot of text, but basically at the beginning of the turn after this guy is played, it gets +2 health, and the next turn it heals for 2, and the next turn +2 health, and that keeps happening, which with Nehemiah means 2/6 equals 6/6. 3 mana 6/6, very powerful. Similar here, a 3 mana 6/6 has like a slight negative effect for the high stat line, but basically 3 mana 6/6. Really big powerful units. That's one thing, whole theme of Earthen, right? Now Earthen also has a AoE card that says all units gain decay. Decay at the start of your turn, a unit and any adjacent units take 1 damage. So easy example, you have 1 unit, it takes 1 damage at the beginning of your turn. You have 2 units, they're next to each other, they take 2 damage, 1 per each, right? You have 3 units, the one in the middle takes 3 because it takes damage from everything, and the 2 on the outside only take 2 because, well, they're on the outside, there's nothing to left or right of each of them. You have 5 units, the 3 in the middle all take 3, the 2 on the outside take 2, and so forth. So it's a very powerful AoE card, but it is also kind of limited because you can play around it positioning wise. You can put your highest health units just on the outside basically, and then they don't die to this. So the other super notable spell card is Formidable Presence. It transforms up to 3 friendly bank cards into 2/2 Bulwark Seals. You can see that here. And each of those is battle ready defender, and they cannot be damaged or destroyed. At the beginning of the next turn, it goes back into the bank, and it does not give an active mana for that turn. So what does this mean? Well, they have defender and they can't be destroyed or damaged, so you literally cannot attack, right? Like you attack, okay, your opponent defends with a 2/2, nothing happens, you just take 2 damage on your guy. This is really scary because, for one, obviously you cannot just kill the guy, you cannot attack into them and they buy themselves more time. They can combine this, for example, with the decay, and then the decay does damage more than once, right? And you couldn't even profit of having your units alive. And the other scary thing is, if they have one of these big units and the big unit attacks you directly, and you play this, these attack you directly, you cannot kill the big unit because it's hidden behind this, and then the big unit attacks you again. So you kind of have to protect your health total very aggressively versus Earthen, and you really have to try and keep them off the board, try to remove those big units whenever possible. Otherwise, they can essentially play one or maybe chain 2 of them together over 2 turns and very, very quickly close out the game that way. The last super notable card on Earthen would be the Terramax Shield Titan. It is a 10/10 shielded, and damage dealt to this unit is reduced to 1. Basically, you need to have some kind of way to instantly kill it, because you cannot deal with it in combat. And if you have a spell to deal with it, well, you need 2 spells, because you also need to remove the shielded before. So yeah, try to keep like a cheap spell in your hand and have a really powerful one that can immediately remove this, or have a unit that says, if it damages something, immediately kill it, because, well, you still deal 1 damage. 1 damage is enough if the unit has that tag. Now, talking about Kathari. Kathari has Aishu, Neos, and Escapius. Now, Aishu you will not really see a whole lot on ladder, but in competitive scene and tournaments, it really is a consideration that comes up a couple of times. So I'm not going to cover too much about this, but basically, it's an 8 mana guy, and you can play it, and if your deck is empty, you create and play a Aishu's Iterant, and that guy has evasive, and the sum of all attack and health and keywords units in your waist have, and it means he attacks the enemy, aka you draw your entire deck, you pay 8 mana for this, you OTK your opponent. Doesn't really happen on ladder because your passive is not helping out your early game, so you usually don't really get there because ladder is very aggro mid-range deck heavy. Neos, basically incredibly weak. The passive got nerfed from +1/+1 to +1/+0, so it's not really worth talking about at this current moment. Nobody is playing this, and if they do, then yeah, you probably win. Escapius, probably the guy that you will see a lot on ladder, one of the strongest decks, if not the strongest deck at the moment. What does it do? The passive, when you bank a unit, you create a 0/1 Escapius Adjutant. It's a clone. There's a lot of synergy with clones and just having a 0/1 that you can buff and interact with. And the Muster triggers all non-Paragon Muster abilities that you've activated this game with targets chosen randomly. Muster is when your card says, if you play me, do something, and you replay all of those, which is pretty crazy. Essentially, the way that Escapius works is they make a bunch of boards, they make a bunch of units, they go very, very wide, and then they have a lot of things that keep buffing those. And at the same time, a bunch of those cards also refill their hand. They just say, oh, draw 1, draw a clone, do something. Like small things, not some crazy, you play me, you do OP thing and the game. No, it's a lot of small things, and they basically keep remaking boards, and they never really run out of cards. So what are super notable things about Kathari and Escapius especially? So one thing is this relic, high density genetic replicator, costs 1 more for each relic you have on the field. Friendly clones have +1/+1. Every clone, which is almost every unit in your deck, just gets a +1/+1 for the rest of the game while this card is on the board. TLDR is you really want to play a card that destroys relics if you play with Escapius, otherwise you're gonna have a horribly hard time to win the game. Then a lot of these cards exist that say whenever you play a friendly clone, the clone gets +1/+1, or this one, whenever you play a clone, you can target something and give it +1/+1. So if they get to just stick these around, if they cannot deal with them immediately, and they get a full turn of mana to spend on playing clones while the buff cards are already on the board, you're in a very, very tough spot. So you should always try to remove these, try to remove the relic. Similar to cards like this, at the end of your turn, you create a 1/1 guy. Try to remove this as well. Just remove everything they do that really keeps on buffing other things or keeps on spawning more things, because they will snowball out of control with that. Then the most notably reactive card the deck has is Magna Tempest Will. It deals 3 damage to target enemy when you play it, and you draw a card and you deal 1 damage to the enemy. Well, you only do all 3 things if a Kathari unit was destroyed during the enemy's last turn. Otherwise, they have to choose which of the 3 they do. These are the most notable ones, and then the mid-game rebuild board cards that are also very interesting are Radiant Legion, which Master, you may clone multi-charge, which means you reveal cards from your bank, and clone means it has to be a clone that you reveal. For every card you reveal, you summon a 1/1. So this card standalone can summon 3, 4, 5, 8 guys, super late game maybe. So it's just a whole board of 1/1s. But we've covered the relic gives +1/+1 to everything, and things like the Lucian Accelerator also exist that it just give other clones +2 attack even. So even those 1/1s very scary. And Triumph of Europa is the biggest card in terms of remaking boards, because it wastes the top 2 cards of your deck, and then you play any number of units with a total cost of 5 mana or less from your waste. And if the units like leave the field afterwards, they are gone. So you cannot resummon the same guy over and over again. But still, you pay 5 mana, and for those 5 mana, you could, for example, summon a Standard Bearer, summon a Cunning Scipion, summon a 1-drop, and even summon a 0 mana card. So it could be 4 guys, then one of them summons another guy at the end of your turn. So it could be 5 guys, and out of the 5 guys, this one gave +1/+1 to 4 of them. If you have the relic as well in play, you summon something like 15 worth of stats across 5 units. Very scary. So yeah, you just really at least try to remove the relic so they don't get the extra stats, and you try to have them not have the buff cards in play before playing, like summon a bunch of guys as well. Then we have Marcolian. Marcolian has Armored Division Headquarters, Catherine Laponte, the Man General, and Lemiao, Master Commando. Now, all of these see play to some extent. They are all playable, certainly. Catherine is the most meta one. You will see the most Catherine, but you will also see the others. Now, where, for example, is the difference? Catherine says the second unit you play each turn gets +1/+1. A very aggressive-oriented deck tries to play a bunch of 1-drops and summon 2 units in a lot of turns so they can utilize that passive, cheat out some stats. And Kathy herself is a 4-mana 5/5 that at the end of the turn attacks a random enemy target. Well, if there's no units, this means attacks the enemy player directly, which is what it's used most of the time for. You kind of just keep removing the enemy board and disconnects phase, or your units connect phase and Kathy just 50/50s on removing one bigger unit or just connecting more damage phase. Lemiao plays a little bit differently, because Lemiao has more utility in terms of tries to control the board, tries to remove a bit of stuff, and Lemiao's passive is that he starts with a 1/1 on the board on turn 1, and that's it. So it's a less tempo-oriented passive than Kathy, because Kathy kind of gets this +1/+1 almost every turn, but Lemiao has a lot more value in the card and in a lot of cards in the deck, because they can destroy damaged units a lot. So you don't try to play really big units versus this, they will just easily get destroyed. You try to play a lot of smaller units, and again, it's a very aggressive deck. You just try to value trade them down, keep them off the board, protect your life total. Armored Division Headquarters kind of is doing the same thing as these two, but even slower, because the deck basically just keeps playing cards every turn, never really stops, and at the end of the turn, every vehicle unit gains a random buff that can be +1/+1, +1/+0, +0/+1, shielded, evasive, or armed. So if they get to stick units on the board, they will snowball and they will keep drawing cards and they will never run out of stuff and they will just keep doing things. This deck, you preferably just have to beat early. Just try to overwhelm them on the board, try to not let them stick units, and then you try to kill them. Now here, the super scary one is the Paragon, because it's a 1/4, and yes, it cannot attack, but it gives battle ready to all the other vehicles. And when a vehicle damages the player, you draw a card, which really helps in terms of not running out of cards. Now looking at the notable cards for Marcolian for red, right? A lot of really powerful 1-drops, 1-mana 1/2 that draws a vehicle, and you buff vehicles when you play them. Whenever you play an effect for the first time each turn, it grows +1/+1. 1-mana 2/2 with usually an upside effect as well. Pretty much the strongest setup of 1-drops in a just aggressive, always playable turn. Then this is the most notable vehicle, which is mostly relevant for the ADHQ, the Armored Defense Headquarters one, because it has armed 4-1 stat line, very, very fragile, but armed means while attacking it deals damage first, so you don't take any damage back. And with the Paragon giving battle ready, you can play it and immediately attack. Very, very scary. And it has an activate that charges. It means the unit doesn't take damage from defenders until the next turn, which rarely matters, but charge matters, because there is a card that allows you to draw a card whenever a card is revealed from the bank, aka charged, for example. So that is part of why they never really run out of cards, because they have a lot of vehicles that can just reveal one, and then they combine that with the extra card draw from the Rummaging Researcher, which we can look up here. This card is played in pretty much every deck in the game. Really, really powerful. 3 mana, 2/5 stat line. You can charge 2 muster, and whenever something gets revealed, including charging this unit, you can draw a card. This also includes your opponent, so if your opponent has this and you reveal cards, your opponent can draw cards. Now, outside of that, all the Marcolian decks have access to Artillery Volley, which destroys a friendly unit, and then it deals damage equal to that unit to all of the enemy guys, so your guys, if you play versus them. Very, very powerful AoE card. Outside of that, Marcolian basically has a lot of utility, really, really powerful units. They do a little bit of everything, and they have a reasonable amount of direct damage cards as well. Now, not every deck is running a lot of them. They have, for example, Crackshot, 1 mana, deal 3 damage. To the enemy player, only 3 damage to yourself and any target. So it can also hit units. 4 damage any target, 2 damage to yourself, 5 damage to any target, etc. So they can burn you down, but not all of them play this. Most of them play very, very few of those cards. So if you can manage to stay 10 to 15 life, you're probably gonna get there. Now, other scary things where you can't really interact a whole lot with here, there's just not much you can do. It's again the same story. You try to keep them off the board, and then you just try to outlast them, try to build boards that they cannot really deal with. The relevant breakpoint for AoE cards, for example, looking at Centurion, is 3. So if you have units that are 4+ HP, they cannot just wipe your board that easily. And they have this really, really powerful card draw card, so if they empty their hand, then it probably often means that they either play for top decking this card, or they have 1 copy in hand. And that's essentially their game plan. Try to apply a lot of early game pressure, and then try to chain that into very powerful card draw cards like Triumph of Mars to keep the tempo going, but they can just brick. Like, they cannot have the strong early game, they can have too many expensive cards in hand. Then the downside of this is if you just get rid of the rest of your hand, right? If you have no other hand, perfect, but if you have other hand cards, maybe not that great. Alright, last but not least, let's talk about Shroud. Shroud is pretty interesting because all 3 of the Paragons have seen a lot of play on ladder, and New Dawn not so much in higher elos nowadays, but in lower elos you probably run into this guy a lot. So what's the difference here, right? They all use kind of the same cards, but this is the interesting part, because usually these Paragon specific cards, for the Juggernaut guy, we said, yep, that guy sees a lot of play. For the other Paragons, haven't really said that about many of them, right? Now, the interesting thing is that Neve passive is your deck may not include cards that cost 6 or more energy. And there's an 8 mana card that removes the entire board and puts it into the Singularity. What is the Singularity? It's the special zone that Shroud has where cards can go, right? You take like an enemy card and just put it there, and then you can do some cool stuff with it. So Neve doesn't have access to the 8 mana really strong AoE card, and it doesn't have access to like the other late game options, which that is kind of trivial. That 8 mana card is the main one. Neve has a cheaper AoE card though that also damages herself when she plays it. So Neve versus some of the aggro decks like Skippy is a lot better because it can earlier interact with the enemy board and whiteboards and remove them. And then Neve tries to usually survive until turn 9 and have this one big turn when she plays herself. And Neve, for each effect, relic, and upgrade you've played, you play a random unit with a pair of the same cost. So you just play a really, really big board and you try to win with that, or with the tempo that you gain, because your opponent has to kind of struggle and remove it and whatnot. So that's the idea of Neve. It is more tempo oriented, more you just get to your big card and you kill the other guy oriented than the other two. Brand tries to tempo swing with himself in the mid game. because there's a card that gives you 1 more mana for the turn, so you can play Brand on turn 4, or maybe if you have 2 cards like that, you can play him on turn 3. And he's a big guy himself. Every time he damages another unit, you get a Corrupted Vision to your Singularity, and if he dies, you summon all of them, you start the game with 1 already. So usually this is a 4/6 that summons 2+ 4/4 if he dies, and you try to use that tempo that you generated of this to get enough of an advantage and kill the other player. Sometimes that doesn't work out though, and then you have to go back to the game plan of, well, now you play around the 8 mana spell that removes the entire enemy board, and you try to outvalue your opponent with high value cards in your deck, and you do. So it's basically a control deck that has a tempo swing in mid game, and maybe you can close out the game with that, and if not, then you try to outvalue the opponent. Now, versus Skippy, for example, outvalue part doesn't really work. You have to try to kill them. Versus Kathari and Marcolian, outvalue part doesn't really work because they will kill you. That's like the tricky part here. But you have a better shot than the other decks in terms of, for example, dealing with Kathari. Now, New Dawn is the ultimate control thing in the game because your Paragon is 3 mana 0/6 and you can spend 1 energy, you banish this unit. Banish means the act of removing a card from the field and placing it into the Singularity. Very happy they chose this term because it's like such a Yu-Gi-Oh! Common one. A Yu-Gi-Oh! Player, right? And when it comes back, you put a card from your Singularity into your hand. So you basically spend 1 energy every turn to draw an additional card. But you don't even draw the card from your deck, you get it from your Singularity, so you just outvalue every other deck in the game. Like, it's not even close. Big thing here is, right, compared to, for example, Neve, you have access to 8 mana, remove the entire board, put it into Singularity card. So your goal with New Dawn usually is you just try to play a tempo-oriented game in the early to mid game. Now you don't have the cheap AoE card like Neve, and you don't have a Brand as the tempo swing. So you have less tools to just get there late game wise, but once you get to the late game, you far outclass everything. So what are like super notable cards for Shroud? This one is very interesting. 1 mana, 1/1, evasive and lethal. Lethal means any damage it does will destroy the enemy unit. So you probably want to have a counter to this. Now there are neutral counters to this, for example, like the Gunslinger. It just deals 1 damage to any target when you play it. Or this is also a card that almost every deck is going to run, so you should be aware of it. No Snitching, 0 mana, removes all abilities from target non-Paragon unit that costs 4 or less. So we talked about the Earthen card, for example, the 1 mana 0/3. This is the main counter to that, and if Earthen is played, everybody is playing this, for example. The same for a lot of the other cards that just have low stat lines but powerful effects. 0 mana, you counter that, and you play a bigger unit. Usually the idea that a lot of decks have. Now, super notable Shroud, a 1 mana removal, Life Siphon deals 2 damage to any card, and it costs 0 if the enemy has 2 more units. So if you have 2 units, and your opponent can play this for 0 mana, right? Very, very scary. Another super notable 1-drop, after a unit is banished on your turn, this unit gains +2/+1. So you banish something, it's a 1 mana 2/4, right? Unheard of strong powerful stat line. You banish a second card, 1 mana 4/5. So you really try to remove this and deal with it. Also 1 mana 0/3, so we go back to No Snitching being a very, very effective counter to this. This is the Neve AoE card that I've talked about before. It's 1 mana and you spend the rest of your remaining energy, and then you deal that much damage as you spend energy on the board. You take 2 damage for every card that you killed. They all go to Singularity as well. So if your opponent is at 3 mana and they play this, they do 2 damage AoE. They had 5 mana, they play this, they do 4 damage AoE. Therefore, if they have 5 mana, you try to have a 5 health unit, and if they play this, it survives at 5/1. They took damage killing the other units, and the 5/1 can attack them, and they eventually die, right? They took too much damage. Other notable 2-drops, for example, like Baron or Void Trapper, if you check those cards out, very snowbally effect tags if they stay around, so you want to remove them / again play No Snitching on them to counter those. Very notable card in terms of the combination with the 1 mana AoE spell that Neve plays, where when you play this, you deal missile like damage, random damage, 1 random damage per damage that you took this game to enemy board. including enemy Paragon and all the units that they have, right? So, I don't know, you took 10 damage, you throw 10 1 damage pings at random enemy targets. Pretty scary because you can deal a lot of damage to yourself with Dominion. 2 damage per every unit. If this kills, I don't know, 5 units, took 10 damage, then Malia is a pretty crazy tempo swing on the board. So you should be aware that this exists, right? This card can be pretty scary as well. It looks at the opponent's hand and you take one card and you put it in your Singularity. If it's a unit, you also get a corrupted copy. So Shroud can steal stuff from your hand, basically. Be aware of that. But if they do that, then they spend 3 mana not interacting with the board. So if you have a powerful board, they cannot steal from your hand. If you have a very weak board, then they can steal from your hand with little downside, right? This card's super relevant that it exists. It copies the last effect, unit, and relic that your opponent has played. So you should always try to play a weak effect, a weak unit, and a weak relic last. If you play a big unit and a small unit, big unit first, small unit last. Big effect, big effect first, small effect last, because Shroud can copy it with this. And then we have Demo. It banishes all units. That is like the best, essentially late game removal in the game. It's super expensive though, so it's like the best in the air quotes, right? It's very expensive and you are not ahead on board, so the other guy can refill the board and you have to reactive again and so on. Very, very good late game card, but it's not like a card you get to it and you won the game. It's you have to have a lot of follow-up. So this covers most of the notable cards that are in those specific factions, right? I advise definitely scroll through this universal part as well. For example, 1 mana deal 2 damage to a unit is one of the staple removal cards a lot of decks will be running. You have a 2 cost destroy an enemy relic card, for example. You also have legendaries like Half that make effects that player plays cost 1 less and the enemy ones cost 1 more. So that's also a neutral that you will see in a lot of decks. And a bunch of other universal cards, right? Like Memento of the Fallen is something you will definitely see. If you know that your opponent is playing a deck with this card, which most of the red and most of the blue decks utilize this alone is enough reason that you want to remove all of their units from the board, because when the unit dies, you equip this to something else, and whenever you do that, it starts at +1/+1 and grows another +1/+1. So +1/+1, +2/2, 5, and so on and so on. Very, very scary if your opponent just gets to juggle this around. This card is also pretty notable because all units have lethal, means if your opponent has a bunch of 1/1s and you think, man, I can just play a big unit into this, well, maybe they can have Master Poisoner, or on your side, if you have a bunch of small units and your deck plays a bunch of small units, you should consider adding this to your deck so you can kill really, really big guys. And Wong, pretty much the most basic card draw card in the game that almost everybody's gonna run, right? And yeah, this pretty much concludes most of the notable cards and decks. Very, very high level. I think I went too long anyways, and I'll do a lot deeper dives, a lot more like competitive dives and infos and details about all of these decks and what to specifically do versus them in the next few videos, I believe. If you guys want to see that, let me know. If you guys want to see something else, let me know that as well. I hope this was a good kind of high-level overview of the game, of some notable things, notable cards, things that you can expect, and hope you have fun playing Parallel. See you in the next one.